be easier to pin it, so let me, can you hear me? If I pin it like that, okay. You ready, Michelle?
I'm ready.
Michelle Liu, I'd just like to introduce her in case any of you don't know her. She's part of our administration team at Gottsche, and quite talented at being more techie than my generation, so thank you for being a part of this. I really appreciated being invited to speak because 68 years is a lot of years, and it's a lot of years to try to cover today. So I thought about which part do I cover and go through? And I decided from the number of questions that I have been asked over my time being here, and I've been the director for 22 years, and that's a long time considering Gotche's been open 68 years. So in some of the questions that I've been asked from new people that have come to town or whatever, why is your name Gotche? Why is that name? And I would try to explain his family. Her Carrie and William had a daughter, and she was afflicted with polio, and that was before the time of polio vaccines, and I would go into it very briefly. Well, where did you get the money, and how did it get built? And so those were a lot of questions that were asked over the years that I had been there, and so I decided that this has got to be more than one part. So I'm going to go with the part that originated Gotche in the background, so you will understand a lot of what is really not in a lot of books. Before I go there, I just want you to know that I was born and raised here, like many of your faces were also, and I was born in the hospital on top of the hill, which a lot of you are shaking your heads, we were too. And then where the future home of Gotche and the Hot Springs County is down there, is where it was built. And I have this photo hanging at Gotche, and I don't know where I got it, but it meant a lot to me when I came on board. So I took and had it framed and put up. And so when we tore down to start the renovation, so many people said, "Are you going to put that picture back up? What did you do with that picture?" So that was one of the pictures that I thought I would share with you, and I'm sure you all would identify with it. Well, I want to start with the background of giving you some updates. There's a lot of mystery in history and whatnot with Gotche and Thermopolis and the beginnings that a lot of people don't want to talk about. So I thought I'd go back and share some of it because I know a lot of you do know it. William Gotche came from Germany. He came in 1860, and he came to the United States when he was 16 years old. He settled numerous times: New York, Iowa, Nebraska, and Kansas. And he relocated to Rock Springs in 1882, and he was only 21 at that time. And it was rumored then that he came over here looking for his father, who had arrived on the Currant Creek Ranch in 1880. And he was rumored that he picked cotton and barbed wire and sheep carcasses to provide for subsistence until he was able to establish some credibility and be able to get employment. In 1885, now mind you, this kid was a young kid. In 1885, he worked for William O'Donnell, a teamster on the dray wagon, was up there, and he also in Mr. O'Donnell's butcher shop until he partnered with Abner Lyman, buying the same butcher shop and becoming the sole owner of that butcher shop in Rock Springs at that age. Might point out a couple of pictures here that we've highlighted in the red, and I'll bring him along because he was a great friend and a partner was Butch Cassidy, which I'm sure a lot of you have heard that, but Butch Cassidy was very loyal and worked well with Mr. Gottsche. William, then he married, after he was over here, he had met her in Iowa. He married Carrie Gottsche in 1889, and probably around the age of 29 or 30, they weren't really sure because it was speculated that they had actually waited to announce their marriage in Rock Springs, because he had actually gone back to Iowa and then brought her back to Rock Springs. He was quite the businessman, quite the guy at such a young age. He was pretty innovative, I guess. He partnered, he moved in and became very active in business with Abner Lyman Lohman, and he opened a family market on the South Front Street in Rock Springs in 1884 at age 24 at that time. So that tells you that he was quite a promoter and a businessman in Rock Springs. And he, in 1889, at the age of 29, somehow he got the warranty deed, but he got the warranty deed for the location of the butcher shop, and he became the sole owner of that butcher shop in Wyoming. In case any of you can't hear, I've got it all narrative that Michelle is showing you also on the board. I might ad-lib a little to it though, but so he acquired that warranty deed to that butcher shop in that age at 29. And during this time, he was connecting up with Robert Leroy Parker, our famous Butch Cassidy. And Butch Cassidy worked for him in the butcher shop. And I know there's a lot of articles and books written, and I don't know that a lot of Gottsche, somehow he was kind of the mystery guy. And I don't think a lot of people realized the involvement that Mr. Gottsche had. This butcher shop, Butch Cassidy worked for Gottsche in the butcher shop, and it was speculation that Gottsche really wanted sole owner of that butcher shop, so he would have the privacy of Butch Cassidy coming and going as he worked for Mr. Gottsche, and also had a back secret entrance on the B Street house in Rock Springs. Some of you are shaking your head, so you know some of the background of this. Thinking, how does this butcher shop be such a flourishing business? Well, the meat slaughter for getting the meat and stuff for the butcher shop, it was speculated that a lot of cattle might have been borrowed. So in borrowing those, and then sometimes they may have altered some of the brands. So it was a very popular meat shop, and there was a lot of rustling going on at that time, and with some of the small ranches turning into large ranches. So at a young age, I was pretty impressed. When Gottsche left the money to our foundation in Thermopolis, we kind of tried, I guess, from what I'm hearing in the minutes and everything, that was all, we didn't talk about that much. So anyway, he had, well, I think the first house, I mean his only house, it was 3 rooms, and I think he ended up adding a total of 11 rooms. And he had these secret entrances. And even since then, and talking to people that were back in Rock Springs at that time, they said it was very, very secretive. A lot of people didn't know about it. Butch Cassidy was the hired hand then, and he needed to be able to leave out the back door on short notice. So without being seen. So those back secretive rooms were added to the Gottsche home. He also had buddies that ran with him and quite possibly also worked for Mr. Gottsche. We've all heard of Sundance Kid. So the questions remain, were the rooms just for Butch and the Sundance Kid, or did he complete a lot of business deals and bring a lot of those people that also worked for him back there? Some of that was really unknown. It was assumed that Butch Cassidy, and I'm sure you've seen that in some of the books, while he was working there in the butcher shop, that's when the name Butch came out, while he was working in the butcher shop with Mr. Gottsche. We didn't know Mr. Gottsche was so famous to us here in Thermopolis. It was during this time that Gottsche and Cassidy would have made acquaintances, and in 1889, he really started expanding the operations and all the stuff he was doing down there. He bought a sheep ranch, purchased it from Harry Joyce, and during this time, Butch Cassidy was also working on the Gottsche sheep ranch, and he was believed to be very heavily involved with the cattle rustling in the area at the same time. In 1890, at the age of 30, Gottsche, he was really gaining a lot of prosperous type businesses and getting very big and well respected in Rock Springs, and he worked hand in hand with the Wild Bunch all through this time that he was really growing and expanding there. And he was very involved in that Currant Creek Ranch. I don't know if you'd all heard of that Currant Creek Ranch, but he progressed. He became very rich, very famous in the town, and he was really glorified at a very young age of 30. So he was appointed on the Rock Springs Council. So at the age of 32, just to recap it all, he was the owner of the butcher shop, owner of the house, owner of a sheep ranch, and he was a very prosperous citizen and very respected in the Rock Springs area. I think a lot of heads were turned the opposite direction at that time. He belonged to the Rock Springs Lodge, the Wyoming Wool Growers Association. He was very big into that, and both of which he was the very dominant member of that. He was also a member of the National Wool Growers Association, the Wyoming Stock Association, president of the Salt Wells Livestock Bank, president of the Brown Park Bank Livestock in Utah and Colorado. At the age of 48 in 1908, his tax rolls show Gottsche as having ownership of a butcher shop, the house in town, 6 ranches by then. 6. 980 acres. He had 179 head of cattle, 23 horses, 10,332 head of sheep, 2 wagons, tons of household furniture, farming equipment, and everything was big time, state of the art, very pricey. He knew how to grow a lot faster than we did at that age, for sure. During his lifetime, William Gottsche was many things. He was well respected as a husband, a father, a rancher, a butcher. He was very prominent and prosperous as a businessman. And he was a livestock baron by then. He served as a senator and a legislator. And he was involved in several levels at many banks. He was prospering financially from his sheep business, he said. Gottsche began investing in all these bank stocks, beginning to take over in banks. And at that time of his death, he was vice president of the Rock Springs National Bank, and he was a large stockholder in the American National Bank of Cheyenne. And he had been president of the first bank of the Superior until it was suspended operation in 1936. I'm kind of giving you a lot of history and background because there's a lot of money there. And then we get to what the amount was that was left. As you can see from these pictures, his braided horse bridle and all this, his equipment was of the top. It was the top. It was not anything secondhand. Everything was top notch. He continued to develop his holdings until at the time of his death, he had more than 70,000 acres of deeded land and about 7,500 acres of leased land that he used for running his sheep, of which he raised 50,000 or more annually just in sheep. Pretty amazing what he had done for sure, with a lot of help from the outlaws. Despite all that he accomplished in his life, and many thought he was somewhat gruff, and he had the reputation, and pretty much from the books, I kind of cleaned it up, and they were a little bit more direct. If you didn't do what he wanted you to do, you were gone. He was also, though, on the top and on the front, he was very generous. He gave a lot to the Boy Scouts. He treated his help with very highest regard. They all loved working for him, taking the barrels of candy with gifts packed inside and taking bolts of the flannel material and whatnot. He also was quite a politician. At the age of 32, he ran for the state representative, but it was as a Democrat, and so he didn't win. And so he switched parties, and he turned right around and ran again in 1908 as a Republican for the state Senate, and he won. He served on the 10th state legislature from 1909 to 1910, and the 11th state legislature in 1911. He did not serve any more public offices, and that was around the age of 49 to 52. His birth was in 1860, and his death was in Rock Springs in 1939. His wife, who, her parents came also from Germany, and they had met up, and she was in Iowa, and that's where, when I was talking, that he went back to Iowa to get her and married. And as a small child, her family had relocated in Hamburg, Iowa. And this is where she became acquainted with Gottsche before he ever came to Wyoming. And he went back and got her. She was a home lover. She was very interested in beautifying the yard. She was a very, very sweet lady from everything we read. She accompanied her husband everywhere on camping trips and all of that. She supported him in everything, even overlooking his involvement with some of his less socially accepted characters, as it says. And that he did on the southern, he dealt there in the southern part of Wyoming. Pretty much, he was always in the southern part of Wyoming. However, he traveled multiple times to Thermopolis back then. His whole thing was more about making money, so he behooved Carrie to be pretty tolerant and ignored. So she had a pretty good life. She died in 1944, and these are from their actual books, the pictures that we had on her. And she was guessed to be born sometime in 1899. And there's kind of speculation that she too had contracted polio. And then they had her daughter, Marguerite. She, after her birth, she had contracted polio, and she was in a great deal of pain, and that was about, I think it was 11 years, somewhere in my research, 11 years before that the vaccine was actually eradicated. And they did everything they could possibly do to relieve her from the pain. Plus they had the money to do it. They went everywhere. They went They came up here a lot. And even back then, at 200 miles and getting here, that wasn't just a easy freeway to come up here, you know, and it took them days and whatnot, and they made many journeys up here to soak in our mineral water. And that picture is a picture that was more or less just a tent of the Star Plunge that just had the tinting over the mineral water. It wasn't anything like what we have today. And they would make the trip several times to utilize it. They went to Warm Springs, Georgia, and all that, and she really, really suffered. And Carrie was also had become somewhat crippled, and they thought maybe she also had polio. And at that time, Butch Cassidy, he'd been still moving and shaking, and he was also coming right along up here with them. And he had a cabin east of Thermopolis. I don't know if any of you have found that location or not. I didn't do a lot of research on him at all. I only know what I've heard over the years through the Rock Springs Bank and that. Anyway, they spent a lot of money and invested in her. And the vaccine, she'd passed, but the vaccine wasn't eradicated until April of 1955. And she had passed away at the age of 14 in Salt Lake after her brief illness, they said, with pneumonia. But there was some question about Marguerite being in Salt Lake at this time. Was she well enough from polio to attend a private school, or was she at the Salt Lake Catholic Mary's of the Wasatch Hospital where they treated there for polio? So there was a lot on her, and she died in 1905. And I went into a little bit on Butch Cassidy, which we all knew. His name was actually Robert Leroy Parker, but he was born in April 13th, 1866. In 1800s, he had also met that Mike Cassidy, who worked very heavily with Mr. Gottsche. And he was a cowhand for Mr. Gottsche, and he was a small town cattle rustler, and he was a big time horse thief too. So, but they all seemed to work well together. So that was Butch's first bank robbery. He learned pretty well from Mike Cassidy, and he really liked the name Butch, and he really liked the name Cassidy, and he really had high respect for Mike. So they went on their first bank robbery, and that was when he and his companions, the Wild Bunch, they took more than $20,000 from the San Miguel Valley Bank. So fun times that we've all heard about them, but we haven't listened to them too much, with knowing that Gottsche has been intertwined at all times, which he was. During sometime in 1889, Butch was working in the butcher shop in Rock Springs, and he was also thought to be working for Gottsche at that Currant Creek Ranch. There's been a lot of investigation on that Currant Creek Ranch over the years, and there was speculation that Gottsche had got his start in the ranching with the help of Butch Cassidy. And during interviews, when asked if this was true, the reply was, you know, I don't really know. So everything was just kind of pushed under the table, even though it all remained a mystery. But something kept bringing Butch back to Rock Springs, to Mr. Gottsche. All this time that he was up here and everywhere else, and all the books, they were very, very close. In 1894, Cassidy was found guilty of stealing a horse worth $5 in Wyoming, and he had to go to 2 years in the state penitentiary. And he was released from that state penitentiary 18 months for good behavior. although not promising the governor he would leave Wyoming ranchers alone. Well, that didn't happen. He reunited as soon as he got out of prison with that wild bunch, and they went into big time robbing banks and trains. And a pattern developed that they would do reconnaissance on the places they planned to rob, and they would stash supplies and horses along the way. There are numerous stories of Butch Cassidy and the Wild Bunch, which we all know and has been throughout Wyoming and being helped out by ranchers. They would have various ranches along the routes that would provide housing, food, fresh horses, and along the way. And Gotche's house being one of them, with the 2 extra rooms and the secret entrances that was coming in and out of night. In fact, he was considered very friendly, and he had a reputation for helping his neighbors. He and Mr. Gottsche and Butch Cassidy. He gave a rancher and his wife cash for a past due bill note on their ranch that supplied fresh horses for them, and he wouldn't accept repayment, and they wouldn't, stating their help was repayment enough. Another time, the whole bunch stopped at another ranch and told them the sheriff was right behind them. And the wife hid them in the root cellar until the sheriff left. So there was a lot of people a little bit afraid of him. Anyway, he left and he made his way to South America, and he started ranching operation. And by the end of 1904, he was concerned that the Pinkertons had discovered his location. So he sold his livestock and left Bolivia. He and Sundance Kid continued their heist, but they got really quite frightened there, as you can see in this rail car, that it was a special car the Union Railroad for mounted rangers organized to try to stop the Wild Bunch in 1890s. It is rumored that Butch Cassidy was gunned down on November 7th, 1908, near Bolivia, but there are sightings of him in the States at various times from 1907 to 1928. And this is when, during that time, that Mr. Gottsche really went on a land buying spree in 1907 and again in 1917. Both of these sightings coincide with all the sightings with Cassidy. The dates were they related. People thought that Butch Cassidy and William H. Gottsche were closer friends than anyone will ever know. All the years tied up together. And how did Gottsche get in all of this? So they had set up, and her desire was to have a foundation that was developed and to have something in her honor in Thermopolis, Wyoming, which was a tremendous love of where they wanted it, and they wanted to set up a foundation. And that will and testament was set up, and it was, if Carrie Gottsche could not fill the role as the executor, the Rock Springs National Bank would become the executor. Oh my, it continues even after. The last will and the testament got turned over to the Rock Springs National Bank, and Carrie was no longer going to be part of that. But in addition to the foundation, she'd named quite a few people, lodges, her church, charitable things, and you can see here on some of the writing, it was all handwritten. She willed the largest portion of their entire accumulated wealth to establish and maintain William H. and Carrie Gottsche Foundation of Thermopolis to benefit other disabled children. In October of 1954, the Rock Springs National Bank organized the William and Carrie Gottsche Foundation and incorporated it under the law for the physical restoration and rehabilitation for all handicapped and disabled persons regardless of race, creed, religion, geographic location. The trustees of the foundation, after several months of investigation, they elected to build the Gottsche Rehabilitation Center in conjunction with the Hot Springs County Memorial Hospital. They wanted one building with one entrance, and I think you all noticed until we just did this re-thing that that didn't happen with the original. As it changed, but for all these years it was under one location, one entrance. Each facility would complement the other and would be administered by separate boards. In June of '59, the joint facilities worked completed, and the work of physical medicine and rehabilitation was commenced in the North Rocky Mountain area, which was a unique facility. There was nothing in this country, let alone this side of the Mississippi, that was anything within several hundred miles radius of this. I did list the original officers, and some of those you'll see. And Charles Smith, he was very prominent in our town. And in the hospital, they also got a lot of the good old boys that got together and on the hospital side, and they worked very well together. This Homer Scott, he actually owned all the First National Banks, and so he was instrumental in being on there. I keep saying that hay because that hay, it was all connected. The Hays going from the father, the son, and the other son, they were all part of that bank in Rock Springs. Up to that point, one of the reasons that I was bringing out some of the reasons here to give you the idea of the amount of wealth, the amount of stuff that was accumulated in all the time. I was giving you the history. It was massive. And there was $450,000 is what was given by the trustees of the Gottsches for that Gottsche estate for the initial funding, along with 4 uncollectible promissory notes from the bank in Rock Springs. It's a matter of record that it took, even at that time, nearly $2 million for the initial funding of the Gottsche startup. And it was a new state-of-the-art facility, and times were very, very hard. Trying to build that kind of a massive building, hiring the staffing and everything for it. And the lowest amount of money coming in, they really struggled, but yet they maintained their dignity and built this fabulous, fabulous place. I had some of the original dedication papers. The center was dedicated in 1959, and I got kind of a kick out of it because I didn't have the original, and I printed it for you. And Barb's sister, Janet Kamenzi, she came up, she said she wanted to see me, and she came over to the hospital, and she said, I found this in my mother's stack when I was cleaning out, and I knew there's not going to be very many people other than you that might be interested in this because of my era, I guess. Anyway, I loved it. I've shared it with my board. I really wanted to share it today. I don't know where Barb's hiding, but it was pretty neat.
I did run out, so there's some that didn't get it. So.
Oh, okay. I have more that we can print too. Also, on John Hay, that went father-son, they all stayed on that board, on the Gottsche board all the time. They were very active. And there was John Hay Sr., John Hay Jr., and they were instrumental in the National Bank and in delaying the funding for the development of the Gottsche Center. And he was still on the board. even after became a director, I was researching backgrounds and calling people and wondering, why aren't you on the board, or asking questions to learn more about some of the history that I wasn't familiar with. And I called the bank and I asked to speak to the son, and I introduced who I was and said, you know, we're going forward. We've got new ideas, and I know Gotche's really been struggling. Can you give me any background or input? I was thinking, well, maybe they'll come up with more money beans or so. I had a different thought. He was very abrupt with me, and he said, as far as I'm concerned, Gotche needs to shut their doors. And it just astounded me. That just made me want to work more and harder and all of that. So I was quite disappointed, but I now understand through the years of my own learning he was also involved with Butch Cassidy and that group too. So there was a lot going on in southern Wyoming. We sounded pretty innocent up here until you read the other books, but this is where Gotche and the hospital launched. They worked hard. There was a lot of local people, and it consisted of treatment booths. It was physical therapy. There was adult and children gymnasium. Our big gym, that was a gymnasium for the patients and whatnot that were there during the day. They had daily living. They had occupational therapy rooms. And to the west, those two cottages, a lot of people always ask me to this day where the Paintbrush Dental is and where Dr. Miller's office is, what were these? And they were built for the purpose of receiving children handicapped physically or mentally needing rehabilitation, which is later to become BOCES, because they left the hospital after their expansion and they built BOCES. But it was all originally housed in Gotche, and that was the purpose of those two big cottages before moving on to their own beautiful facilities, which was another growth for our community. So that was a good thing. All had different directors. Hospital had different director, Gotche had different director, and BOCES had different directors, even when they were then they started kind of growing a little bit, and in March of '64, they contracted with the Veterans Administration to become a certified clinic. And upon approval, the center was authorized to make all types of limbs for the veterans of the Northern Rocky area. And that was the Gotche Orthotic and Prosthetic Department. I think it was Mr. Carmelo, and some of them were hired, and they really invested in this department and became very well known. The wooden legs were very popular back then, and people were coming in from other countries, and all was coming into Gotche, and we were very well known for that. And it was a state-of-art facility, although when you look at some of these pictures, you probably wonder. But they had, in 1960, they had a great caseload, and they had a lot of clients and visits. It was really amazing. We'll share those as we go through them. There's quite a few pictures of, you can see where they were. And I also was, in the 60s, I was one of their patients. I was in a really bad car accident in the 60s when I was in high school in the canyon, and I had the opportunity to my family not have to take me elsewhere, to be able to do my rehabilitation in this beautiful facility at Gotche. The reason I was leading up to all of this, and you saw that Gotche never got the amount of money and all of that, and they got all these notes and stuff. And there's a book here, and it's called Mystery and History. And this is the legends of the Currant Creek Ranch of Sweetwater County. And this was printed, finally, they worked on it for a long time. Mystery and History, Legends of Currant Creek and Southern, about Butch Cassidy and William Gottsche. Because he was pretty well hidden and not, in all the Butch Cassidy talks and everything, they didn't know who the big guy was behind him and who was hiding out. And so this book, she finally finished it, I think in 2005. Yeah, I think it was 2005. But I came on the board first. I served 2 years on the board before I became director. And the author and the research people called me. And Ava Barton, she was the author, and she said, you know, we've done an awful lot of research, and we've got a lot of the background records. We know what all this property sold for. We know what was in the banks, the money, and you certainly have a good case. This is umpteen years later, you know, that she's done this research, and they came and talked to me. She wanted to come up, and they had all the county records and everything, and she said, you could sue for this. Well, I told her I'd just taken over the last few years. This was long ago, you know. I was 7 years old when Gottsche was built, and so at that time, and I told her finally, and the author, and she said, she kept calling with more and more information, more stuff, and was trying to encourage me to do so. And I finally told them I appreciate everything they did. And what they started out to do was the sneaky transaction and businesses that had gone on at the Currant Creek Ranch. And that's why they had started investigating and found a lot of hiding places there, and how Gottsche accumulated it and all of that. And I just told her, I said, you know, Gotche's not in a good financial situation. I really don't feel that Gottsche can afford the attorneys. This could go on for years. We need to go forward. And this is long before my time, and I just don't want to spend any more money chasing stuff that I think is going to hurt Gottsche. And in the long run, it may never, it's a gamble. I didn't want to be a part of it. So she was really disappointed because they just knew they had the greatest thing going. This book, you can get. There's several people that have read it. I think that's probably why Gary suggested I come here, because he's like, nobody knows the stuff you know about Gottsche. And I said, well, I guess I'm the last of the big history. So if you're interested in it, you can get it right off of Amazon. And it's still being published, still part. So, and it's Mystery and History. And I've made it a lot kinder than some of the accusations or whatever's in the book about Mr. Gottsche, because I think he was one heck of a businessman. I mean, he was a mover at a very young age, and in those days, to scare everybody and end up with deeds to land and the butcher shop, how he was able to maneuver. There's a lot in there. He borrowed a lot of money from different banks, and he always paid it back within a year. And he was big time into politics, but Gottsche has more than grown, and I don't regret not pursuing it. So, and that was pretty amazing to me when I got called on that, because I actually graduated high school here, and I didn't come back until I got smart 20 years later or so. So this is where we are today. And it's not that we haven't had some rough down times ourselves, because we have. We've had some ups and downs. But when I started, there was one doctor in town when I took over. There was one doctor. And it was like, that's pretty hard to survive. And then a little bit, few years later, some of the doctors started traveling here, some of the orthopedics and that kind of thing. And so I started saying, well, Gottsche can travel. So we put our therapists on the road and we started providing services in other places. And so in the last 22 years, we have grown tremendously in opening in 6 facilities. We bought out Dr. Biles and Emery and Schmidt, the rehab centers that they ran in Cody. We bought those out and then opened Basin in Worland and now in Shoshone. We're in Shoshone. Also the hospital's in Shoshone. That's going to be interesting because with the new hospital being built in Riverton here in the next year or two, we'll see how that is going. But the Shoshone actually got the grants and the money to renovate the old bar. I forget what the name of that bar was. Bebop's owned that bar in Shoshone. They renovated that and they had all the money put into that to have their own wellness center. Does that mean I need to shut up? No? Okay. I don't want to put anybody to sleep. This is definitely the type of thing that I was sharing with Barb. There's so much history even, and a lot of politics and a lot of changes that have gone in and from the day that this opened on their original to now, and then some of the growth and the things we've had happen in the last 22 years that I've been happy to be a part of. I even tough out the downs, and we do write off a lot. We do try to help people a lot. It hasn't been as lucrative the last few years as it was back in your high oil field days when it was really booming. Gottsche was really blessed with a lot of donations back then in comparison to now. The largest donation that I ever received, and it was by total surprise, and that really helped me kick off being able to build their endowment, and that was the Tate Foundation in Casper. He was a noble tool guy who just went to all the oil fields selling tools, and as he went around, he also bought land very cheaply and accumulated. And he was a very they never moved out of their same house or anything out of Casper. And when he died, he chose 8 fairly solid, which they felt would be long-lasting companies. Shriners Club, Gottsche. I mean, he named Gottsche in that, and that was pretty outstanding. And I was called to Casper to be a part of hearing what that was about, and I didn't really know what it was about. And these 8 facilities was each awarded $1 million. So that was back, and believe me, that's never been spent. That went into an actual endowment to help preserve, because Gottsche was really hurting when I came on board. And then we had a bad dip, as we all know we did, in 2008. So that million kind of disappeared on paper during that crash, so we had to wait for that to come back. So it's not always been a perfect situation, but I've been in it for the love and the passion, and I love this community. So I keep saying when I'm going to retire, I appreciate what all you are doing in your retirement, and this is a great thing that I really want to be a part of also, is preserving our history. To us, in our age and our generation, that's very important. I don't know if it's the younger generation, but I was telling Reese, we need people like him to come on board. So anyway, there's mega stuff and years of exciting things that could be shared. I hope I've given you a little bit of background. I wasn't trying to be negative about it. I just wanted you to know that there was big wealth that was set up for Gottsche, and it didn't get to Gottsche. But I'm really proud of our community because our people back then pushed it, made it happen, and built it. And truthfully, there's no place like it to this day, even now. I mean, we're really blessed with such a great facilities that we have. I want to open it up for questions. Yes. Gene used to be in our board. Thank you.
Yeah, my name is Gene Benke. I was a member of the Gottsche board and executive committee for 13 years. Cheryl left something out, and it needs to be said, and not many people know this. Cheryl's a pretty damn smart businesswoman. When Cheryl took over as executive director of Gottsche in the early 2000s, it was on the verge of being bankrupt. And through some shrewd investments and a couple of surprises here and there, and getting out and hustling grants and getting on the phone to every charitable organization in the country to help prop it up, it's turned into a very successful, frankly quite large rehabilitation center. So she doesn't give herself enough credit, but I tell you, those of us that are on the board, that have been on the board, and went through some pretty tough times, to see what it is today is absolutely remarkable, and that's due to Cheryl's leadership.
That's right.
Well, thank you. Thank you. Yep. Thank you very much. When I came on board, one of our therapists is still here, and I told him, you're going to be shut down in 3 or 4 years, so I got to make a lot of cuts. And Susan still to this day says, why do you think we didn't like you? you were chopping and cutting, and you took away some of our vacation, and you did all this and that. And I said, well, I want to be here longer than 5 years, don't you? And so I got to give them credit that I've had a great team too, and I've had great boards, great board. He shouldn't have retired if he said. So anyway, thank you for that. Any other questions? Reese, and then we'll get you.
Was the butcher shop in Rock Springs, or was it here?
It was in Rock Springs.
Okay.
Yeah. I didn't hustle everybody's cattle up here. He did it down there. Yeah. Ellen.
Well, I was wondering, that book you were talking about is not in the library?
You know, I don't know. I don't have any idea. Of course, she sent me a bunch when they finished the book, Ava did, and I gave them out to a lot in the community, and this book has kind of fallen apart. So Michelle went online, and I said, we got to get new books ordered. It's got a lot more detail than this.
Maybe we need to investigate and make sure there is one in the library.
Good point. Thank you. Okay.
Well, my friend and I used to walk down in the basement.
Stand up.
My friend Joy and I loved to walk, and we used to walk down in the basement at Gottsche. And there was old beds, and there was old TVs, and we would sneak down through the hospital part, get in there and put a brick in the door so we wouldn't get stuck. And now it's this beautiful workout
Oh, my
center.
heavens.
And my son-in-law Peter loves to work out. He's lived in Denver, now Billings, and he's worked out at so many different facilities, and he says Gotche's the best one he's worked out at.
How nice. And they live in Billings.
Now, they lived in Denver for many years,
Uh-huh.
and he loved this one better than all of those.
Well, thank you.
Now I don't have to sneak down there anymore.
Well, Kay and her family has been very helpful and very gracious and very appreciative. Going back to her mother, when her mother was here, and I really enjoyed their assistance and belief in Gottsche. And thank you for that. Yeah, that was a scary place down there. It was really bad. And the hospital had one half of it, and Gottsche had the other half. And if a bed broke down, it went in the basement. If, you know, everybody in town that wanted to store stuff, Red Cross, whatever, it was in the basement. And that took a mound. It took almost a year to clear all that out of there. And I had these great plans of what I was going to do, and Dr. Wilson, I still remember him saying he didn't quite see it. And at that time, he was still the old surgeon. And so when I got it all done and finished, he said, "What architect did you use to put this together?" And I said, "There was no architect." "Well, how'd you know what to do?" And I said, "Well, we got it together." So I'm very proud that we were able to do that, because truthfully, I had just had open heart surgery in my early 40s. There was really no place to work out. We didn't have a YMCA, we didn't have anything. And my thing was, it was just not me. There was not a very good opportunity for anybody here. And so we didn't just open it for our patients, we opened it for the community. And we average, it changes a little bit in the summer because a lot of people want to do outdoors, but we average about 300 paid members. And percentage-wise, based on our population, that's pretty good. So I'm really proud of it.
And I'd like to say it's one of the best things that's happened to Thermopolis.
Well, thank you, Ellen.
And I go there every day.
She does. She makes me look bad. Thank you for that, Ellen. Any other questions? Any other shared stories of any experiences that any of you have had with dealing with Gottsche?
Well, I was having therapy, and so I was doing the stair steps that go down to the gym.
Uh-huh.
And so my therapist said, well, I said, well, I haven't been here in years. And he said, would you like to see it? So I did some more of my therapy by walking around. I was shocked.
Oh, great.
I couldn't believe it. It was just amazing.
Well, thank you. We have some of our visiting surgeons and doctors that come over, and they're at the hospital. And we always like to give them a tour so they know where to maybe send their patients and stuff after surgery. And we've had so many compliments from those traveling docs that said, we don't have anything like this. So, yes.
My story is not unlike Cheryl's. I was in a car accident when I was in my last year of college, and I was supposed to do my student teaching that fall. And because of the opportunities at the hospital and at Gottsche, I was able to do all of my doctoring in my hometown. And I lived in the hospital for 2 months and would have to be in the hospital and then go down the hall to Gottsche for my therapies and then back to the hospital until I was released. And I guess it had good results, because here I am.
Oh, well, they did. They did. That was a very serious car accident that they were in. It was in the canyon, wasn't it, Susan?
Yeah, it was on the Badwater Bridge.
Yeah. Thank you. Well, I know we're not venturing out into the country or anything, but I want to catch Nadia here.
Yeah, my husband had a stroke in 2020, and Gottsche has been so awesome to us. They're like family. I'm sorry, but they're the best ever.
And I hope we still are.
Yeah, they're getting him walking. I mean,
Yeah.
They're working so hard. It's not just like physical therapy, but the staff is incredible. It's just, I'm speechless. I can't. Thank you.
Well, thank you. An awesome family. But Mike and Nadia came here and had great ideas, and they were ambitious and energetic. And Mike got hit with that stroke, and they're family to this day. I mean, and then we look at each other with progression, and we still cry, don't we, Nadia? So we're really happy that we want him as he recuperates, to be sure he knows Gottsche is like a home to him. And I was looking all over for him to get an automated wheelchair back, if I can share that. And I was so excited when I found one. A family in Basin had it, and they just, their spouse had died early, so it was brand new, wasn't it? It was just, and to see him in that, because he used to drive heavy duty equipment, so we thought there's going to have to be a lot of therapy and training him. He came flying by my office like he knew exactly. He wanted to show me I could back up and turn around and that. So thank you for sharing your story. We still see him regularly, and I hope we continue to do that and offer our services to you too. Any other stories? Yes.
Not a story, but can you, like, I go to the bistro for pleasant lunches sometimes, and was there food there before, or can you talk a little bit about?
Oh, yes. Thank you for mentioning that. We, during the hospital's construction, when Gottsche was opened with the hospital, and Tom would be a good one to have known back then, it was all the cafeteria was built on the Gottsche side, but it was also supplied by the hospital, and we supplied the space, did all the cleaning and did everything, and then the hospital supplied the services. And during their changes and new additions, they gave us about a 2-day notice that they weren't going to no longer have it, that they were putting it in drawings to have their own cafeteria. And I was given 2 days notice, and I said, wow, but you're not going to have it for a year. She said, well, we're just going to have our staff do brown bagging and whatever until, but we don't want to be a part of it anymore. I know nothing about a cafeteria, cooking, bistro, nothing. And it was like, oh my goodness, I can't do this. Because when you think of the amount of time that the employees leave to go to lunch and come back and all of that, that's downtime from being able to have opportunity to eat in a half an hour and still treat and whatnot. And it was very important to me. And at that time I contacted Krista Raymond. And you all probably know Krista. And I told her my dilemma. And I said, how fast can you help me out? And she said, well, I'll be over tomorrow. So we started putting this together, and she wanted to go. We did great. We did great. Her sandwiches and her traditional, and she'd been here for years. And we still had like all the hospital families and stuff, and the patients, visitors still, was really heavy and coming and very supporting of the bistro. And then Krista decided to move to Nevada with her son, and I found this young gentleman. He happens to be in the audience. I think he wanted to really find out what the Gottsche was all about. And it's Levi. Levi, would you stand up? Levi is a great chef himself. He's a true foodie lover, and he helped us out of a bind. And if he didn't, we just call Krista in Vegas and get the recipe on the bread or whatever. And Levi got that all perfected. And oh wow, you can share, but he keeps telling me it's the best job he's ever had. But he's been in business cooking. His family has owned restaurants in Orland. Anything you'd like to share?
No, just, I did grow up in the food industry and went to culinary school for a couple years in Denver. And I've worked in dozens of restaurants all over the country. And yes, working for Gottsche, being able to manage bistro is hands down my dream job, and it's definitely the best job I've ever had. So I love being a part of this team and serving the community. Thank you guys for the opportunity.
And the food is really great. If you haven't eaten there,
It's really incredible. We get a lot of compliments on the food. We also deliver some days, right, Levi, up to 20 a day throughout the community we deliver.
Or takeout.
Yeah, or you can come and take out. So thank you for mentioning that. And the other thing we have that's really great is we have several of the different organizations, ladies' churches, groups and stuff that come and book to have lunch at Gottsche, and we're very happy to have them. So thank you for bringing that up. It's very important, and especially when the chef is sitting there in the back.
But he's very friendly too. I mean, it's obvious he likes people.
He loves it. Yes, he does.
And that makes a difference.
He's quite good in a band and stuff in his own church. And I said, I hear you singing there too. And he said, oh no, that's only in the back room when I'm making all the food. So thank you for bringing that up.
But you know, it's all about the food, right?
Yes, yes. Well, I'm pretty fortunate to be back in my hometown, and I've been here, like I say, for over 20 years. And it was the smartest thing that I brought my sons back to see the way we were raised, and camping and fishing and tin sleep and the mountains and all of that. And I'm really happy to be a part of serving and giving to the community through Gottsche. And I need to get helping and supporting all of these other senior things before I become up on the hill. I said I'm starting to know more people up on the hill and over the riverside than I do in town. So,
Cheryl?
Yes.
When you had the slides going up there when you was talking about Mr. Gottsche, the one on the left-hand side looked like a Mason
Oh.
emblem.
yes,
Was he part of the Masonic?
yes. And we had to look up some of those initials because we weren't sure what they were. Michelle's been wonderful in helping me put this together.
Yeah.
Do you want to share what those were?
It's on my phone and my phone's recording.
Okay, we can.
Jerry, what does AF and AM mean? It's,
Well, that's affiliated with the Mason, free and accepted Masons.
yeah. Yeah, so that's, I kind of found it this morning, but my phone's recording, so.
That's okay.
It's on there.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, this has been wonderful, and I really, I don't want to put you guys to sleep, but it's like I told Barb yesterday. I said this really is way more information and history that I could be giving of Gottsche, and I tried to shorten it up, but I really wanted to know what this great organizations in our community and some of our past, Charles Smith, John Heron, and some of those people, what they did. And there was many times that they could not make payroll, and they were calling all over for people to help them make payroll. So there were a lot of difficult times, but they were all committed into making sure this Gottsche went forward. And I was also, I think I was raised to do that myself, because it was like, if I was told no, it meant. I still remember calling Rick Wecker. He was no longer an orthopedic surgeon there, but I knew him, and he had left and gone over to Riverton. And I said, I'm thinking about applying for this position at Gottsche, and I'd like to get your opinion, because we don't have an orthopedic surgeon active anymore in the community. Can you give me your feedback? And he said, Gottsche is Gottsche. It'll never grow, and it'll never go any further. It can't. We only have one doctor, and that's why I left and went to Riverton, so he could expand his practice. Well, the more no's I got, the more I wanted to really get to the bottom and make sure that this stayed, and I felt really responsible in doing that. And that being said, I've had wonderful board members who have supported me, and all my visions and dreams and everything I've proposed to them. I'm expecting them to say no, and they have done nothing but support me 100%. And it just made me want more and more to be able to make it successful, right, Jean? So they've been great. We still have great board members on our board. Wonderful people in our community. Brad Bassey's on our board. I didn't bring the list of board, but that's a whole nother years and years of stories to tell. I only took you up to 1959 and then surfaced what we are today. And there's quite a bit there. How many of you knew that Butch Cassidy, because I know a lot of you historians here, we all know about Butch Cassidy, we all know about his books. How many of you knew that he and Gottsche were involved together? None? It was just, we can't figure out, and even this lady that wrote, the author that wrote this book, she lives in Glendale, and I got to be friendly with her and the researcher. And she said it's a mystery in history because how Mr. Gottsche stayed away from any publications and, you know, and yet he had them going in and out the back door and all of this. So anyway, I want to thank you all again. Thank you. Thank you, Michelle.
I want to thank both of them for putting together this presentation. The Gottsche story is a story of success, and I think a lot of it certainly goes to Cheryl.
So Michelle,
Normally we offer a small stipend, and I was informed that that'll be declined. What I would like to do is issue complimentary membership in our society to both Cheryl and Michelle for this presentation. So thank you very much.
After I was hearing their $75 one, I thought that sounded pretty good. I only have to do this one time. So I liked it.
You like it?
Yeah.
We certainly appreciate it. Normally, our meetings are adjourned by consensus. Show of hands to adjourn. Thank you. We got that taken care of. We do want to thank Ellen Gallion for the refreshments. So we'll disband and we'll hunker around the refreshment table.